So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our participants from around the world for the SynZenBe Show conference. This is the session on assessing your CSR strategy to maximize impact. My name is Van Lee, and I am joined here with my business partner, Mimi Vu, and we represent Raise Partners, a social impact consulting firm based in the UK and Vietnam. Today, we will be joined by Paul Norris, who is the co-founder of Unavailable, and we'll be dealing with this in two parts. First, we will talk about sustainability and manufacturing through the Vietnam lens and looking at some issues in the sort of post-COVID world, looking at CSR and assessing your CSR strategy. And Mimi will lead that discussion. And then second, we will have a quick Q&A with Paul Norris from Unavailable and look at the sustainable apparel manufacturing in Vietnam, issues of being proactive versus reactive. So first, I would like to introduce again Mimi to present on sustainability and manufacturing through the Vietnam lens. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Van. Let me share my screen here. Okay, great. Everyone can see? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And here's my session on sustainability and manufacturing through the Vietnam lens. So a quick overview on Vietnam and the impact of global events on Vietnam's manufacturing sector. So for a number of years now, I'd say in the last 10 years, Vietnam has been growing as a manufacturing destination and a key country in the global supply chain. Particularly as following the China +1 model. However, in the last 6 months, there have been a series of huge global events that have turned the world upside down and has impacted Vietnam's manufacturing sector. The first is the trade dispute between US and China, which has, with the inclusion of tariffs and the threats and the retaliations of counter tariffs, has negatively impacted companies' supply chain in China to the point where they are now looking at alternative destinations. Vietnam being a neighbor of China and also having a large existing manufacturing base has been a recipient of this, one of the largest recipients of the shift of manufacturing from China to other countries because of the US-China trade dispute. The second thing is COVID, which the world is still going through right now. How that impacted the manufacturing sector is that, number one, orders fell across the world, but especially in Vietnam, where the GDP is highly reliant on the manufacturing sector. So apparel factories, because they lost orders for the regular garments, were able to pivot quickly to produce masks and other PPE items, such as the suits. And now are exporting these products all over the world, including the US, UK, Germany, and to the point where Vietnam also gave donations of PPE equipment that were manufactured in Vietnam to all of these more developed countries. Vietnam not only now produces PPE and masks, but they also have shifted other areas of manufacturing into medical items such as ventilators, and are now producing ventilators for export as well. Some of the issues that still plague the manufacturing sector here is one is the difficulty in getting raw materials, and also that factories across the board have had to lay off thousands and thousands of workers. As it stands, the total fallout so far of employment because of COVID is about 5 million Vietnamese have lost their jobs, and another 5+ million have lost at least some or most of their income. And then the third thing is, it also relates to COVID, is the supply chain diversification away from China, because what COVID did was laid bare the sort of the dangers of concentrating all of your manufacturing, all of your supply chain in one country, particularly the case of PPE. When China was undergoing its COVID crises, it stopped the export of masks and other PPE. So that created shortages in other countries. And so now countries realize that, you know what, going forward, it's not the safest or the smartest thing to concentrate so much of their supply chain in China. And so there are now actual movements, government movements. So for example, Japan has created a fund to help Japanese companies shift manufacturing or parts of their manufacturing out of China into other countries. And again, Vietnam will be one of the biggest beneficiaries of that. Not just in apparel and footwear, but also electronics and other industries. So in 2020, Vietnam's GDP growth is projected to be anywhere between 2.8% to 4.8%. The figures range from World Bank to IFC to Asian Development Bank, but the point is that Vietnam is one of the few countries in the world that's projected to have positive GDP growth. In June of just last month, in fact, Vietnam's economy grew by 0.36%, which is one of the few countries in the world to have positive GDP growth in the throes of COVID crises, COVID pandemic across the world. And then in 2021, Vietnam's economy is expected to rebound back to pre-COVID levels, which is near 7%. And that will be fueled by large part manufacturing. So this picture right here, this was published by Politico in May, is a snapshot and basically the state of the world, Vietnam and the world in 2020 and probably in the foreseeable future. So the X and Y axis measures the economic outcomes and the public health outcomes based on the responses of countries to COVID. And as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, all by its lonesome self is Vietnam, where Vietnam has had the best, because of its performance during COVID, it has had one of the top COVID responses in the world, and consequently will have the best economic response outcomes in the world as well. Currently, Vietnam has a total of 372 infections, and there's only about 20 active infections left, and we've had 0 deaths. So, and also nearly 3 months now without any community transmission. So which means that Vietnam has been able to focus fully on economic recovery. So what does this mean for manufacturing and investment in Vietnam going forward? What investment companies, investment funds and companies and manufacturers and business in general have realized during the COVID pandemic is, number one, who are actually the essential workers. If any of you have participated in webinars about investment and economy in COVID, time and time again, you will hear the theme that actually we understand now the essential workers are the factory workers, the warehouse workers, healthcare workers, delivery people. And so going forward, investors are clearly looking at how companies have dealt with the social and environmental side when it comes to during COVID and post-COVID responses. There is a realization that the financial system, any sort of financial investment and just the global financial system is heavily dependent on how strong the environmental and social systems are. And that was clear during COVID, and that is clear going forward. Companies now, especially investment funds, and companies looking to invest in other countries like Vietnam, are looking at how well the country does when it comes to supporting the the most vulnerable. Because during COVID, you saw that a country's strength was only as good as how well they took care of their most vulnerable. For example, Singapore. Singapore is one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and in the beginning of the COVID pandemic, was doing extremely well, had very few infections, everyone was compliant. But what happened was that they forgot about their migrant workers or didn't pay attention to them. And so you had few months of very, very good performance by Singapore during COVID, and then within weeks, thousands of infections appeared because it spread through the migrant dormitories that did not receive the services and the protections that the rest of the Singaporean citizens did. And so because of that, because of the weakest and most vulnerable in Singaporean society were left to fend for themselves, COVID spread across the country, and then therefore Singapore had to shut down and go into strict lockdown, one of the strictest lockdown procedures in the world, and is only just coming out of it. So that has been clear now going forward, that you have to pay attention to the most vulnerable and the environment. It's no longer enough for companies to just focus on business and then having a few CSR programs or charity programs on the side, and then be compliant with laws, especially factories. Companies must improve their comprehensive corporate citizenship program to be better companies, better performance, have better not just financial performance, but also sustainable performance in whatever country they're investing in. So what we will see is a shift from regular CSR, regular charity, to environmental, social governance policies and procedures that will be adopted throughout companies, factories, brands, retailers, especially in emerging markets. All of these policies and procedures will be or should be implemented into the overall business strategy because they affect the bottom line. If you're investing in an emerging market such as Vietnam, that has positive GDP growth, that is open for business, and that has so much opportunity going for it, you want to make sure that your investment is stable and sustainable and as profitable as possible. And that means that you not only have to invest in your normal financial portfolios, but also investing in NGOs, partnering with local community organizations and with local officials as well, local government, to make sure that the environment, not just the physical environment, but the social environment in which you're operating is strong and able to withstand any shocks going forward, whether it's environmental, whether it's storms or typhoons or any other health pandemic that comes out again. And so globally as well, consumption is intertwined with social environmental awareness. You cannot get away from it. We've seen that not just with COVID, but we've seen it also with the social activism around Black Lives Matters, Indigenous Lives Matters, and what that's done is created even more so a social awareness among consumers who will not or do not want to buy product that they know, and it's now with internet nowadays, it's very easy to trace supply chains of companies, where they're getting their raw materials, how they're treating their workers. Lots of NGOs are publishing this information online. And so consumers are increasingly taking that into consideration when they choose to buy their products. So manufacturers, brands, and retailers will have to understand this and also implement this going forward into their business strategy. This idea of, in the past, almost just recently, fast fashion was king. That is gone now because the whole world borders are sealed shut. So the movement of goods, movement of people, globalization has slowed down because we just are not as mobile as we were before. So what that's causing now, and people have lost their jobs and people are much more conscious now about spending. So they are not buying as quickly, they're not buying as fast, and they're not discarding as quickly as before. And so this world, this movement of fast fashion is no longer able to exist. So this push towards slow fashion, this push towards high quality goods, low volume, high quality goods is what we see will be the target in the foreseeable future. Environmental efficiency as well for factories and for supply chain logistics. Because borders are shut, it's hard to get raw goods, it's hard to move goods, much harder than before. The cost of energy is going up, and also the issue of climate change is coming to the forefront finally now across the world. Because factories are located in emerging markets, oftentimes there's issues with climate change and pollution. Definitely in Vietnam, we are one of the top countries in the world that will be most affected by climate change, especially with rising sea levels. Vietnam is a coastal country that's connected by a network of rivers and streams and deltas throughout the entire country. And so we are suffering right now just because of the effects of climate change, salination in the rivers, and that is influencing also migration. So these are all things that we have to take into account when investing and doing business in Vietnam, especially when it comes to factories and manufacturing. Discharging of water and manufacturing runoff into the rivers is also another big issue that factories and brands and retailers will have to confront going forward. Social inclusion and protections for factory workers across all tiers is going to be coming to the forefront as well, especially since Vietnam will be a recipient and is already a recipient of the shift of manufacturing from China into Vietnam. And so now what we see is there will be, there's less external movement of Vietnamese workers going overseas, and there will be an increase of internal migration of Vietnamese workers moving from province to province to get manufacturing jobs. And so these workers need to be protected. Safe migration in the manufacturing sector needs to be something that companies pay attention to when they do recruitment of workers from poorer areas into the industrial zones. Also inclusion of differently abled workers, LGBT, ethnic minority workers. These are all things that consumers will pay attention to. And so in order to make sure that you have low turnover and that you have staff loyalty, factories, brands, and retailers will need to implement policies that protects their workers going forward. And lastly, it's not enough anymore just to do no harm, do no evil, but you have to be proactive now and always try to do and be better. It's not, you have to, no one can, no company, no factory, no investor can sit and say, okay, we've done enough, we're good. It's a changing environment, and the changes will keep coming at you faster and faster and faster. So you have to constantly stay ahead of the game and look at your operations and think, how can I be more efficient? How can I be, treat my workers better? How can, and that will engender loyalty, that will engender efficiency. And all of that will help improve your bottom line. So thank you for this. And now we'll move on to, we'll bring in actually Paul Norris, the co-founder of Unavailable, a large garment manufacturer here in Vietnam. Paul is English, British, and has been in Vietnam since 2013 and has a very interesting story personally and professionally from when it comes to being a foreigner working in Vietnam, and especially in the manufacturing sector. So thank you, Paul, for joining us today.
Good afternoon, ladies. How are you?
Excellent. And okay, so stop there. Okay, great.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. So when Mimi and I were discussing, we were trying to think of an example of a manufacturer whose CSR strategy and sustainability aligns with their core values as a company and is also part of a core business strategy. When we try to think of who has been very thoughtful about issues around the question of fast fashion versus slow fashion, and looking at, your environmental and social impact, we thought of you. So why don't we start first by letting you introduce Unavailable. And if you could tell us a little bit about your company's history and how you've sort of incorporated sustainability into your growth journey.
Okay, I'll do my best. Big introduction there. I'm not sure we're quite far. Anyway, I'll do my best. I have been here in Vietnam since 2003. We actually started our business here in late 99, 2000. My business partner was Australian. And we literally started in his bedroom in the back streets of in Binh Thanh in Ho Chi Minh City. We had one machine, and we were producing samples for our own brand and then outsourcing it to various factories. But eventually we grew over time, and we brought in more business as we went. We've got to where we are now. And we are a business of, it's not a huge business, 450 to 500 people. In terms of the manufacturing sector, that's reasonably small. We're fairly vertically integrated. We've been through a fairly diverse history of brands. We've started in the low end, kind of dealing with the high street brands, and then moving through into the sort of mid-level, and then moving right the way through into your kind of, Italian fashion brands. And we've settled somewhere in the middle where we are now. And that's manufacturing for kind of your street hype fashion brands. Those brands that are launched online and then sell out within seconds and are on eBay and what have you. And then they're very driven towards, they're very driven towards design, cutting edge fashion. They want to be the best. They want to be the fastest to market. And they have a burning desire to be the best at what they do, which is great for us. But not only that, I think that the shift, and Mimi's touched on it recently, that the shift in what we're seeing now and where we've ended up is we're very much with clients that are direct to consumer. The old regime of multi-brand stores going to market twice a year, producing lots of samples, selling them, shipping them, is gone. We're very much dealing with a more direct client right now. And I think that's where we've ended up as a factory. And that is a huge point when we're talking about sustainability, because like Mimi touched on as well, it comes down to the finance, and it comes down to the funds, and going direct to consumer and skipping the agents, the distributors, the retailers, and literally having the brand buy from a factory and retail it. They're allowed that margin that they need in order to go sustainable, because sustainable in terms of environmental and in terms of your workforce and what have you, if you're going to do things right and you're truly going to do it right and cut through all the nonsense and really go for true sustainability, it is going to cost you slightly more at this time. And it's only those brands that are direct to consumer, I feel, who are really able to fully embrace it. So yeah, that's where we've ended up at the moment.
Can you also just give a little background on how you've done your goal setting in terms of tracking your environmental impact, your social impact?
It's very difficult to actually put numbers on it, but you have to start somewhere. Without points of data, you can't see whether you're winning the war or not. And I think it is a war. The point here is that to be unsustainable, and again, going back to what Mimi was saying, is it's not good enough to just be doing less. We're not as bad as we were. We're not as bad as those guys. It's not about that anymore. You've got to be way, way better than you were, and you've got to continuously improve. So in order to do that and continuously improve, you need to have points of data. You need to start somewhere. So we started about 4 or 5 years ago, and frankly speaking, before that, it wasn't really even, it wasn't a thought, because I've been a true environmentalist since I was a wee lad, and I've always thought of myself as being a marine biologist eventually, although I think I'm a bit too late for that now. But that was what I wanted to do in life. And so I've always had this inherent love of the environment, and living in Vietnam, a stunning country, a beautiful country. Sadly, I've seen its waterways and some of its areas, become more polluted, as any country in a developing situation does. It grows dramatically and extremely quickly, and sometimes its infrastructure is not able to keep up with the growth rate, and therefore we get a little bit too high in pollution. I think they're doing a great job in trying to curb that, and they're really putting in place some good policies, but it's very difficult to control. We're the 14th biggest nation on the planet, so it's very difficult to do that. So what we did was, the first point we had to try and get over was, what are we going to do? We're going to have to pick some points. So what's it going to be? Are we going to pick environment? Well, that's a very big subject. So what are we going to do? We're going to break that down. And we broke it down and saying, okay, well, let's look at climate change. And I took the Fashion Pact is very much on this. This is the 2025 that was introduced last year by Caring Group. And they're looking at it a very similar way. You've got climate change, you've got waste, and you've got everything else in between. So we basically focused on, energy, water, waste, and people. We took those 4 headers and we said very clearly, let's measure them. So before we got there, though, and this is one of the main points I think of this conversation, was I truly believed that being at the head of the company and being the director of this particular business entity that we run, I honestly thought that, somewhat naively, I could put this directive out and say, guys, we're going to go green. We're going to be more environmentally conscious. This is what we're going to do. Let's go forth and do it. I was crazy to think that. The mindset of the people and where I was culturally was way off. And honestly, we fell flat on our faces for the first 6 to 12 months. And it was very frustrating, because I knew where I wanted to be. I saw other companies doing it, and I could not understand why we were not able to get there. So my sustainability manager, who I brought on, a young German VQ girl, lovely lady, and she came on with a very positive mindset. And we figured out after 6 or 12 months of going round and round in circles that we were unable to get where we wanted to be because the mindset of our people, frankly, didn't understand and or didn't care about what we were trying to do. They just saw it as more work for them. They didn't see the end goal or why we were trying to do it. And that's when we changed our strategy as a business. And we looked at it and said, okay, well, how are we going to make this relevant? How am I going to tell the people who are sewing on my floor for, you know, what is considered a fairly mediocre wage in terms of, you know, the wages that we are offering in Vietnam? It's not considered a highly skilled job. How am I going to tell them, with all their worries, we've now got to concentrate on the environment and become a more sustainable business? And what's going to make them care? So we did slideshows. And we went around, we took photos of the areas before, and we found old photos, and the areas now. We took rivers, we took the road outside, we took pictures of their hometowns, we took the fish in the sea, we took all these pictures that basically were very, very literal. And they said, this is what we used to look like, this is what we look like now. There is a problem. And that's really the crux, and that's how we began. We had to make it relevant to our people. And from there we expanded. Electricity. Something else that the Vietnamese people here are very, very savvy on is the cost of things. They've had an up and down history, as you all know. And for a while there, this country was extremely poor. And they've done so well in the last several years to pull themselves out. But they're very understanding of what things cost and why we should save. We shouldn't waste. Vietnam doesn't waste a lot. They're very careful in that respect. So we made it relevant as well, saying, guys, this money here that we are putting into our electricity or the waste that's going in our bins or whatever else, that's money that should be coming back to everybody in this company. And so we did a test and we said, right, well, let's not waste this much this month. And then we're going to have the extra money and we're going to do something fun with it. And it worked. And they were like, we get it. So it's by making it relevant to them, we were able to even launch some of these programs that we've got going on today. And I think that was a massive step for us. So then we get into the matrix. We put electric meters in each of our departments, and we told them, this is your average for the last 3 months. If you can beat it, we'll incentivize you with a reward. Money or chance to go out for dinner together or whatever else. But you have to have the graph and it has to show downward spirals. So it has to show an inverted pattern. And it worked. They were like, great, we have something to go at. We can, and they started switching off lights. They started switching off heaters. We started, turning off the air conditioning. We educated them on, an air conditioner, for example, at 18 maximum versus 25 3 bars uses a fraction of the energy. So it was through that education process that we made it work. We did the same with our fabrics. We were wasting. And so we basically went out and measured our rubbish. We weighed our rubbish. And we said, how much fabric, how many kilos of fabric are we wasting per month in cabbage, which is the offcuts of the, and it ended up being about 650, 700 kilos. We said, okay, how do we get that down? We bought new machinery. We had a look at how we were optimizing. We went back and worked with our suppliers to increase width or decrease width to optimize it. And we got it down by about 30%. The electricity, we got down by about 38% through using LEDs, through this, through that. We managed to reduce it significantly. And so these were key indicators and these were key measures that showed that we were actually starting to win this war. And the next one, and we're still going through this, it's, plastic, wastewater. How can we get these down? How can we measure them? And that's where we're at right now. Is the next step for this is let's go to zero plastic by 2020 was the idea. Whether that's possible or not, because of the technologies available now, we're still working on it. But we've put some initiatives in to make sure we're seriously reducing our plastic waste.
Can you talk a little bit about from one example that you gave us before about reduction in plastic with the coffee cups, for example? Because I think that's something factories, anyone who's watching in the audience who has factories or staff that use, plastic coffee cups could get some tips from.
We are a nation of coffee. Vietnam, I think every second shop on the street is a coffee shop. I have no idea how they survive, but we are a nation of coffee. We grow a lot of the world's coffee. So And they like their bubble tea and everything else. And delivery services here are instant. You can get anything delivered from anywhere for very cheap. And so while we were going through this process, I kept seeing these 6 or 7 bags at a time coming through, being delivered to staff in the office, or thankfully not on the factory floor, but in the office. And it was 8 plastic bags, 8 plastic cups, 8 plastic lids, 8 plastic straws. And I was like, why are we not getting through? This is the worst. This is the worst of the worst. You've got 4 pieces of plastic for 1 small drink with ice. And so I said to the guys, I'm sorry guys, we're going to ban single-use plastics. And there was an absolute uproar. And they said, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do this? But I said, come up with a solution. I want you to come up with a solution, because every day you drive home, you look in those rivers and you see it full of plastic. And that is because you guys are producing them. We haven't got the rubbish disposal capabilities to cope with the amount of plastic we're producing. And so they came up with some ideas. They started sending their recycled plastic cups back with the delivery drivers that were delivering the new ones. They bought 2 sets, and they were only ordered from 3 places, and they had to get delivered in paper bags, or I think we made some canvas bags. They were recycled, reusable cups with the lemongrass straws. And so I said, there you go. Not only are you not using the plastic, you feel good about it. And I think they even gave them a small discount because they weren't using all the packaging. The next thing we did was we said, okay, well, I'll open our own coffee shop, which is in our new facility we just moved into, which is operational hopefully next week. And we've opened a coffee shop. They made the menu, and I've made it a non-profit organization. So we put up a pretty sophisticated coffee shop within our own facility. It's half the price they pay for outside. It comes twice as fast. It's right there. We don't make any money out of it. It pays for the person who's running it, and it pays for the raw materials only. Done. Carbon neutral, not carbon neutral, forgive me, but plastic neutral if you like. So we have no wastage. We bring our coffee beans in, we get them delivered in a certain way in reusable plastic tubs that we can reuse again. And so we've got rid of our plastic cup issue. And I think, honestly, there was probably about almost 100 plastic cups, bags, everything else coming in per day, which is a phenomenal amount of waste. Works so far.
No, that's amazing. I think that's taking into consideration the idea of like culture, because like you said, Vietnam is a coffee culture. People, especially working, they have to have their coffee every day. And so you didn't try to make them change their culture, but you worked within the culture, the context, in order to help them change their behavior. How much does Vietnamese mindset and culture play in your daily decision-making process when you're trying to get your staff to buy into whatever it is that you're doing? Do you try and put yourself in the mindset of the Vietnamese person? Because you've been here for a long time, you speak Vietnamese, you pretty much Vietnamese.
A white Vietnamese guy.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Look, I mean, cultural differences between our 2 cultures. My wife is like you guys. She's Vietnamese, but obviously Canadian Vietnamese. So I've definitely learned a lot from her. And I think that we've been immersed in the manufacturing world, which is a bit dissimilar to the kind of office world of the central, business district. We're immersed in that culture. We've only got like about 6, 7 foreigners that work with us. So I'm really immersed in the culture. And I think it plays a huge role. Unless you make it relevant to the people you're trying to work with, and whether that's cultural, whether that's hierarchical, however you want to put it, you need to make it relevant to them. And the cultural thing here was the understanding and the level of importance that was put on an environmental or looking after the people standpoint. They just didn't care. And they're like, why should we? And one of my senior staff at the end of this, I think 6 month, bashing my head against the brick wall to get it through. She came to me and she looked at me and said, Seb, why are you putting so much emphasis on this? Have you looked outside? Do you think you as one person are going to win the war on what's going on outside? And I was aghast. I was like, well, we have to start somewhere. And I said to her, if I can affect 500 people here and your families are 5 people, then 500 becomes 2,500. If they can affect 5 people, all of a sudden we've got 12,500. And so the story goes, but we have to start somewhere. And she looked at me and she goes, good luck. And I said, well, I'll take that challenge because we do have to start somewhere. And I think they do, they definitely see where we're trying to go. And one of the things the other ways I made it relevant through the culture is local people here love to be involved in worldwide culture, as do we all. They love to be involved on social media now. You know, the World Wide Web has opened their eyes, and it's fantastic. You know, they've got Instagram, they're all over Facebook. They're very quick to adapt, and they want to be part of this world that everybody else is part of, and they are now. So they see what's going on in the world, and they see why, you know, and it's like it continued. The more times you see a message, the more it goes in. And so through that and through the success of our business, and I've had to try and tell them, you know, I'm not doing this from a marketing point of view. I sincerely am not. I think it does help our business, but I'm sincerely not. But if that helps them get there and it helps me get them there, then I'll use it and say, listen, if we become a sustainable business, we'll be a better business, a more profitable business, and we'll have more clients. So it's ringing those bells, and it's culturally and from where we're standing, making it relevant to them.
No, that's amazing. I think that's a lesson that any company or any factory that is working in a country that's not of their similar origin, the idea that culture should play such an important part when it comes to implementation and designing programs and procedures and policies. You can't separate the two, especially if you want buy-in from
Sure.
staff at all levels. Absolutely.
And you can't do it on your own. You cannot do it on your own. If you don't have your team behind you, it's pointless. You're not going to get there. You can't change 450 people individually every day. You just haven't got the hours in the day.
So how is Unavailable continuing? What steps are you taking to continue this development of like mindfulness and awareness among your staff? Everyone from the line workers all the way up to senior management.
I think it goes back to your point, Mimi. You know, this is not somewhere where we get to a point and we go, we're done, fantastic, here we are. It's never going to stop. I had somebody the other day say, God, Paul, you just don't stop about it. You know, it's continuous. And they said to me, well, how far do we go? And I said, well, how far would you go to save your life? They're like, oh, don't be dramatic. And I said, I'm not being dramatic. I don't think you guys realize. It panics me when I read these statistics about how far we are from reality. It's like, forgive me, it's like the cowboy thing. Oh, we'll be fine. No, we're not. You know, it's like the environmental standpoint here. How far do we go? As far and as fast as we possibly can is my response to that. So my team say to me, are we done yet? No, we're not done yet. So we go as far as we can. The next step for us, we continue to do what we're doing. There will be a ceiling to my current initiatives. There is only so much energy I can save. You know, our solar, we had to move factories for the first time in 11 years because the other factory would not allow us to put solar on the roof. And one of the fundamental reasons I moved factories was we have to have solar. We live in a country that we don't have winter and summer. We have 12 hours of guaranteed sunlight a day. We have to go solar. It's a non-question. So we've done that. The next one is the wastewater we use. The next one is we're working now with people on natural dyeing and reduction in water. We're now going into OCS and even further GOTS certified fabrications. These are governing bodies that really look at not just, oh, is the cotton organic? Are the farmers being paid correctly? Are we using as little water as possible? Is this being processed in a plant that is also solar? It's not just good enough to be it yourself. All of your vendors also have to be it. Otherwise, it's just you. And you're only part of that chain. Just because I'm sewing and printing and putting that garment together, if it's not being grown in the right way and we're not producing it in the right way, fail. You've got to be all the way. The next step for us, and it's a big step as a garment manufacturer of our size, is to go into kind of, you know, the blue sign areas. And blue sign is another governing body, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure most of you do, is another governing body which goes to the next step. It looks at every single thing that you do, and can you do it in a more efficient manner? It's expensive, but long-term goals are people who care. Brands like that we are starting to produce for within the caring group, like Alexander McQueen and people like that, they do care and they can afford it and they do want to afford it, and their end users are there to afford it. And we're producing garments that are going to last the test of time. There's $200 million a year of garments produced that immediately end up in landfill because they only last 8 washes. We're producing garments now that will last 20 washes, 50 washes, 100 washes. You can have them now and ideally pass them on to your children. You know, not that you would because of fashion changes, but that's the idea. So you're not continuously buying product that takes 8,000 liters of water to make and or releases fabrics and harmful fabrics and harmful toxins every time you wash it. You've got to make that garment in as efficient way as possible, and it's got to last for as long as possible. This fast consumer fashion world is dying. We're producing, forgive me, and this is sounding a bit too much, but we're trying to produce an asset. You don't go and buy a new car every year. Well, I certainly don't. But we don't buy a new car every year. You buy a car that lasts, and you hope for it, to be as best you can. It's the same with a garment, and I think people are slowly coming to that realization. So that's the next step, is to go truly green and actually make it green. Biodiversity is another part. I want to be able to hear the birds singing around my factory and grow wildlife and really create a very nice environment that is carbon neutral, if we can get there, and that really has this supply chain that is really invested in and scrutinized to the nth degree until we can say, yeah, that bit's done. What's next?
So Paul, you just started to touch a little bit about your ethos strategy of low volume and high quality manufacturing. How are you communicating with your customers about sort of your sustainability program and the choices that you're making?
Interestingly, I work with some very unique brands, in this really interesting dimension whereby the people I work with don't advertise sustainability. They're people, brands, for example, like Palace that we manufacture for, phenomenal people, and they don't need to advertise it. They're just doing it because it's the right thing, and they have the money with which to do it, and they want to be doing the right thing. They are asking me about, Paul, I want you to make our product as sustainably as physically possible. And they're trusting in us, the manufacturing, because frankly speaking, it's a very new trend subject, if you like, and there's very few real experts out there about it, and when you do your reading and you deep dive, there's a lot of surface kind of nonsense, and when you really get involved in it, it's a very, very in-depth subject that you can lose yourself in. So our brands are in this great situation where they're asking us and saying, hey, we are behind you 100%. Whatever it is you're doing, we support you. And that's great as a manufacturer because they can afford to support you. They're not producing thousands and thousands and thousands of garments. They're producing a few hundred garments of a color, of a style. They're making it very sought after. They're charging a good price for it. And people are really taking care of it because they're creating an asset. And it has, at the moment, a lot of the brands we make for have a resale value as well, which is often quite a lot higher than the retail price. So it's really this kind of new dimension of brands. And that's where I think the industry is going. They want to be unique. The end user wants to be unique when they buy the garment. It's a limited run. It's moving back to the kind of cottage style industry.
So I just have a quick question to follow up with that. There's an age-old debate over who's pushing the trends. Is it the consumers are the ones who are dictating, so the manufacturers and the brands have to, react to that, or the consumers are like, I don't know, I'm just buying whatever is being marketed to me. What in your opinion, what is it? Who sets the trends? Who's doing the pushing?
We have this argument as well, in an ideal world, I want, and my team think I'm mental. I said, we've got to make it such a big deal that the end consumer pushes us. If the end consumer demands it, the brands will demand it, the factories will demand it, and so the supply chain goes. What sells works. So if the end consumer starts really looking into sustainability in its fullest context and starts to understand it more, as I think everybody is, as it becomes more popular and more of a buzzword in the industry, then hopefully they're going to drive it. At the moment, I think it's a few people. I think governments are on board, but again, sadly, if I'm honest with you, I think governments are doing it because they have to. I think a few people are truly passionate about it. Guilty. But it's that kind of thing. It's those people who I think can see the benefits and can see the low-hanging fruit and understand that it's not going to be that painful to get there. And the reward is phenomenal. I mean, what you can achieve and the metrics that you can then use to how much water have we saved this year? How much CO2 emissions have we saved this year? And when you put it in terms of trees, for example, our factory is, I think, supposed to be saving, and don't quote me on this, but I think it would take 25,000 trees planted every year to equal the solar paneling that's going on the roof. and things like that. You think, oh my God, that is absolutely incredible. Then you've got, of course, the long-term question of what you're going to do with solar panels. Are that sustainable? Are they going to be dealt with in the same way, et cetera, et cetera? So back to your initial question, who is driving it? Yes, the consumer is driving it. Yes, I believe the industry and the market is driving it. Thankfully, the high fashion brands now, Caring Group, the likes of those guys are driving it, which makes it trendy. I think we've got big celebrities that are driving it as well. That's making it popular. Social media is then taking its part. And slowly but surely, it's becoming more and more a buzzword. The biggest buzzword in our industry right now is, well, Corona. But apart from that is sustainability. And there's very few people who actually go, well, show me your sustainability strategy. They're like, can you prove to me you're sustainable? Can I put it on my swing tag?
So we're coming to a close on the session. So, you've given us a lot to think about in terms of, how to engage your employees, how to get them to own some of these sustainability programs, talking about engaging your customers and also the consumer, driving sustainability too. Is there any sort of lessons learned that you want to share with manufacturers as they start to define their CSR strategy or sustainability strategy? From your experience that you want to share as a sort of parting thought?
I think we only have a few minutes and not a few days. So I'll try and keep it brief. I think going back to my point of making it relevant, if you really want to be truly sustainable, first of all, do your research and figure out what part of sustainability you want to be involved in, because the subject is huge and it's endless. And when you start, you'll look at your business and go, oh my goodness, I am the least sustainable business on the planet. And it's demoralizing. So start small, go after the low hanging fruit and make sure you capitalize on it. Show yourself and your team some wins, justify them, make them relevant in terms of what makes them tick, whether it's how many trees you need to grow, or whether it's how much money you've saved, or whether it's what you give back to them. Make it relevant and really baby steps. And as the ball starts to get rolling and your team starts to get hold and you start to get them excited about it, make sure you keep it fun and it will snowball. And there is a plethora of information on it online. And there's some fantastic people doing some great things. And I think if we all just took those first steps, and it's daunting, but don't be disheartened. You can do it. We're not some amazing factory that have got all this sorted out. We haven't. We're only halfway to some of these steps, but you've got to start somewhere. And once you start, the snowball effect will take hold. And hopefully it never stops.
So I think that's a great part. So Paul, thanks again for sharing your insights from Unavailable.
Pleasure.
That ends our session on assessing your CSR strategy in manufacturing through the Vietnam lens. And thanks for all the participants for the SynZenBe show conference. It's been great. Again, I'm Van Lee from Raise Partners, and that was my business partner, Mimi Vu, and Paul Norris. And thanks very much for joining us.